So early last week, Fox News producer for Tucker Carlson said, "Hey, do you want to be on the show?" I think they said tonight or something. And I couldn't do it, so they said, "Hey, how about later this week?" And we figured out that Friday, which was the end of the week, would be the time I could do it, and they had a spot. So keep in mind, this is an important part of the story, that I agreed to be on the show before I knew what the topic was. So when you do that, it's sort of the luck of the draw, because the topic has to sort of be something that happened that day, or else it's not really the right fit for the show. But not every topic makes a lot of sense for me to be commenting on. So because North Korea had launched their rocket, and we wanted to at least have some kind of tie-in with that, but not depart from my field of expertise, if you can call it that. And obviously, I don't know anything about North Korea. So the suggestion from the producer is, "Hey, how about you talk about why is it that the media is covering Russia so much when that's not especially real, but the threat from North Korea is very real. So can you talk about why the coverage is one or the other?" So I went on Tucker's show and I talked about that. Some of you saw it. So keep in mind, my only contribution to that topic on Fox News, anyway, forget about my blog for a moment, but on Fox News, was why was the coverage and the persuasion, if you will, something that I write about, have written a book about, and know about. Why was the persuasion so Russia-focused and not North Korea-focused? So I talked about that. I won't go through that, but so that was the setup. That caused clips from the show and screen captures of me talking to Tucker to be tweeted about. And very soon they became disconnected from the video. It was just a screenshot of the topic, on the bottom of the screen being North Korea fires missile, and there's Tucker's face and my face. So this caused people who didn't know what it was all about, but they were critics, to on Twitter to say many versions of sarcasm, as in, "Oh, let's get the guy who knows Garfield." They call me the Garfield guy because that's hilarious. Or to talk about international treaties and North Korea. So a lot of people jumped in to say, "We got him. He's trying to be too much of an expert on North Korea. So we're going to jump in there and embarrass him to the world by calling out his lack of expertise. How ridiculous that this could happen." And of course, it would be ridiculous, and that's exactly why it didn't happen. So trust me when I say that Fox News would not invite me on to talk about how to deal with North Korea. And if they do, they should rethink that. So as now I compounded the problem, as I like to do when things are especially vexing and people are getting really mad. I like to rub it in a little bit. So I wrote a blog post today, one of several, in which I did talk about North Korea and potential ways to deal with them, partly as a question. Now, the way I frame it in my blog, and I said it as clearly as you can, I don't know anything about this topic. I'm not an expert on it. But I wonder why, and what I wrote about was there are about 10 Chinese companies that are doing all the trade, the most of the trade with North Korea. And so the blog post was about, can a country attack a company as opposed to attacking another country? Can we just go after those 10 companies with cyber attacks and, commercial attacks and banking attacks? And so it was really in the form of a question. Now, I required no expertise to ask the question and to say clearly, I'm not an expert in this field. I'm just wondering, is there any reason we can't do this? Which is what I blog about. It's stuff to make you think. Now, here's the part that prompted this this Periscope. So I started getting a lot of advice from my critics, and it all tended to have the same flavor. What they said was, stick to drawing comics, stick to comics, stick to drawing, stick to Dilbert, stick to making bad jokes about The Office. So here's the context I want to put on that. The first thing I would say is that anybody who thinks like that, either about themselves or about another person, has what I call the loser philosophy. So the loser philosophy is sort of the Homer Simpson philosophy. I think he said it in one episode, some version of can't win, don't try. So, imagine me sitting in my cubicle some 30 years ago and thinking, hey, I think I could be a cartoonist with no experience whatsoever, none, no drawing classes, just nothing. Oh, I did take one drawing class in college. I got the lowest grade in the class. So it was ridiculous for me to think that I had a shot as a cartoonist. As you know, if you're watching this, things worked out for me really well with no experience whatsoever. As that started to take off, a publisher noticed an article I wrote in the Wall Street Journal and said, hey, how would you like to write a book? Not a book of cartoons, but like a real book about the office and office culture. Well, I had never taken a writing class except one day class in business writing. That was it. And I had no idea how to write a book. And if I'm being honest, I rarely read books. I'm not even a reader. I mean, I read tons of stuff on the internet. I skim things. So I am actually reading and absorbing all the time. But I'm not really a big book reader. I can't remember the last time I read an entire book. I tend to pick parts out of it and read summaries and that sort of thing. So I said, I'll give it a shot. So that book became a #1 New York Times bestseller with no experience whatsoever. Later, somebody said, hey, we got a lot of Dilbert fans here. How would you like to give a talk to our group? It was a big energy organization. And they said, do you give public talks? And I said, no, I don't. In fact, I don't have any experience on that. It's something I've done exactly 0 times. Not counting little presentations to the work group and stuff like that, which is very different. So, but I said, I'll give it a shot. If you're willing to overpay me, I'll go do that. So with no experience whatsoever, I went up to Canada, which is where it was, and gave a speech. I'd have to say it was terrible. I'm not being humble, not being modest whatsoever. I'd never done this. I was trying to be funny. It wasn't very funny. Didn't really have much of a point to it. But they were happy because really they just wanted to meet the guy who did Dilbert. Now, as time went by, I got other offers, and I practiced and I learned, and I became one of the most highly paid speakers in the world. So 20 years ago, I was offered up to $100,000 to speak for an hour. So that's the rate I was getting. So that was 3 businesses in a row that I had no experience in. None. Did okay. Some of you know I have a startup called WhenHub. That's the closest thing I have to anything like some valid experience, because I've done some startups. I've been involved with a number of businesses. I have an MBA, so starting a business should be the thing I know how to do. And we've got some exciting things you're going to see in about a month or so that may be jaw-dropping and just how useful it is and how many people use it. So I don't know if that'll be successful yet, but I got to say everything's looking really good. But I hadn't been, much of a startup guy, right? Now, if you look at President Trump, and then more recently, back in 2015, I started writing about politics. And 2 years later, I was, if I may modestly say, the most accurate political pundit maybe in the world. Now, you could say it was all luck, and, time might prove you're right, because I'll make more predictions, and you can see how I do. But objectively speaking, if you were to put all of the totality of my predictions about what would happen against anyone else's, I had a few wrong, as did everybody, right? But my accuracy probably was number one in the entire world, which is why I get asked on television shows and my critics do not. So that's 4 entirely different lines of business in which I started with no experience and ended up at the top in very little time. Now, I, of course, have written and talked about the fact that I built intentionally a very useful talent stack. Yeah, you're ahead of me. You said it before I said it. So if it looks like it's a bunch of coincidences, or if it just looks like, hey, you were smart or you worked hard and, so you did several things, I would say it's a little more than that. It has to do with building a talent stack that's really, really flexible. I'm sort of a learning machine, so I'm continually learning all kinds of stuff. Yeah. I wasn't going to mention this, but those of you who are familiar with my girlfriend, I'm not going to say any more about that. Let's just say that category isn't doing too poorly either. So then you look at President Trump, all right? Part of the reason that I predicted his success is that he has a talent stack that's insanely powerful. He's smart, he's funny, he's tall, he knows how to deal with the public, he knows persuasion, which was the important things. He knew a little bit about politics by being around it. He knows deal making. I mean, it's a really long, deep list of talents. And that's the reason that he could inherit this much money and eventually turn it into a lot more money when probably a lot of other people were inheriting this much money and turning it into this much money. And he's been successful across a number of businesses. He went to reality TV and dominated. He got into politics. He dominated. He wrote a book. It was a #1 bestseller. Yes, I know he had a ghostwriter, but still, the ghostwriter couldn't write that book by himself, right? It was the Trump part that made it work. So here's the point. How much experience did Steve Jobs have when he founded Apple Computer? None. How much experience did Bill Gates have when he founded Microsoft? None. How much experience did Henry Ford have when he created Ford Motor Company? None. Right? How much experience did Apple Computer have when it created the first iPhone, first smartphone? Well, you could say they had some related experience and they hired smart people, but anybody could have hired smart people. So to me, there is no more clear tell for someone who is not successful and never will be than someone who says of another person, stick to your day job. All right? Now, certainly there are plenty of people who try things and fail, and probably more of them try and fail than try and succeed. But the people who are trying things and failing are far more likely, to hit something lucky just by trying more than the people who say, well, I better stay in my little day job. I don't want to try a new thing because I'm not an expert. Only experts can succeed. Even when we're surrounded, we're swimming in counterexamples of people who did not do this, have no experience, and have not only succeeded, but have succeeded at the very highest levels. It's the most common thing in the world. Now, clearly there are places where this doesn't happen, right? So you don't see somebody becoming a doctor on the first try. You need to train for that. You don't see people becoming a lawyer on the first try. You kind of have to train for that. But there are a ton of fields that you can just walk right into. The guy who wrote The Martian, was that, the novel The Martian? That was just for fun, huh? Give me that Homer Simpson quote on failure. Facebook is another example. How much experience did Mark Zuckerberg have in creating a social platform? None. But it gets better. It gets way better than that. How much experience did Mark Zuckerberg have in managing a fast-growing company? None. How much experience did he have in managing an enormous company? None. Zero. None. How much experience did Jeff Bezos have? I mean, I could go all day, if you want. I could do this all frickin' day long. Sergey Brin. Don't quit your day job is the loser advice. The specific version that they say to me is, stick to drawing comics. I actually wrote a book called Stick to Drawing Comics, Monkey Boy, because so many people have told me to stay in my little box. Now I wonder sometimes a little bit what causes people to say that very specific thing, because there's so many ways that a critic could come after me, just millions of ways, but they all seem to huddle around that very narrow and ridiculous loser point that people should never try new things. And I think the answer is that some of it is low self-esteem. It's people who can't try new things themselves because it would be frightening and they don't think they'd succeed, or maybe they wouldn't. But I think they don't want other people to succeed outside their box because it would make them feel as though there was something wrong with them because they couldn't get outside their box. I may be reading too much into it, I do often caution people not to assume they can, see into people's inner thoughts. So this is just speculation. But what in the world would cause somebody to suggest that someone else not try something in a new field? Look at it this way. Even if you were pretty sure they wouldn't succeed, shouldn't you try it anyway? Because obviously, some of you know I wrote an entire book called How to Fail at Almost Everything and Still Win Big. Because the point is, if you pick the right things to fail at, you still come out ahead, right? So it's all about picking the right things that when you fail at them, you still learned a whole bunch. You met some people, you made some contacts, you built up your skill stack, so that the next thing you try, which might be another thing that you've never done before, you've got a whole new set of skills to come into it. So anybody who tells you keep your day job, or just as importantly, if they've ever said it to anyone else, that's someone who is not successful and will never be successful. That's the most loserish philosophy you could ever have. The best philosophy is don't stick to your day job. Let me say it again. Here's the best. I don't give advice. All right. So my philosophy is not to give advice. And again, I wrote a whole book that looks like advice, but I made a big deal of saying, no, this is just some examples. You have to come up with your own advice. But if I could violate my rule just this one time, I'm going to give you all some advice. It's the best advice you'll ever hear. Don't stick to your day job.